McLaren is in the middle of an explosive court case with its sometime F1 tester, wannabe Grand Prix driver, and multiple IndyCar champion Alex Palou. 3 years on from Palou's F1 race weekend debut in practice at the United States Grand Prix with McLaren, the Spaniard is facing off against the team in a UK commercial court over an eye-watering amount of money. McLaren is claiming more than $20 million in lost profits following Palou's shock U-turn 2 years ago when he reneged on a long-term deal to drive for McLaren's IndyCar team and have an F1 reserve role after McLaren had already put him in its F1 car several times. After a long lead up with various exchanges between the two parties and a lot of court submissions since 2023, the case finally started being heard in October, will continue into November, and may not be resolved until early 2026. Among what McLaren wants to be recompensed for is the renegotiation of a major NTT sponsorship deal in the wake of losing Palou, other commercial renegotiations, a $400,000 bonus to Palou that McLaren claims was just a requested advance of his salary, and extra variables like renewing the contract of its IndyCar driver and another F1 reserve, Pato O'Ward, to ensure it had a top-line driver in Palou's absence. Palou admits breaching his McLaren contract, so that's not up for discussion here. He's pushing back against the damages because he felt entitled to walk away from the deal. The crux of Palou's argument is that he was misled by McLaren Racing CEO Zak Brown into believing he had a clear-cut F1 opportunity if he signed for the IndyCar team. The multi-year deal that Palou agreed with McLaren in 2022 included private F1 testing, simulator work, Friday practice outings, and a reserve role, but no specific guarantee of a race seat. He was contracted to race for the team in IndyCar for multiple seasons, with options on McLaren's side to extend further into 2027 and to 2028 if it had an F1 race seat available for him. Palou claims that the F1 role was used as a negotiating tactic and that he never wanted to race for McLaren in IndyCar in the first place. He had just won the title with Chip Ganassi Racing when McLaren made an approach at the end of 2021. Palou claims to have instructed his then management to tell them he would only be interested in driving for McLaren in F1. The F1 links were tempting enough to convince Palou to breach his Ganassi contract and join McLaren, which Palou admits already gave him the reputation of the contract guy. But he claims that after McLaren signed Oscar Piastri for 2023, Palou felt his situation changed and he was never going to be more than an F1 reserve. Because of what he called lies and false impressions, Palou felt justified in not honouring the contract and instead agreed to stay with Ganassi in IndyCar. This led to his decision in August 2023 to refuse to race for McLaren in IndyCar in 2024 after all. Palou's McLaren F1 work was short-lived, but still included quite a lot of work beyond his Austin FP1 outing. He spent 2 days at McLaren's factory in August 2022 before sharing a 3-day test in a 2021 car with O'Ward at Barcelona in September, worked as a support driver on the simulator for the 2022 Singapore Grand Prix weekend, did 2 simulator days in March 2023 to prepare for being a reserve driver in Miami, and tested the 2021 car again in Hungary in June 2023. Had Palou not breached his contract, he would then have been trackside as a reserve driver at several races at the end of 2023, taken part in the Young Driver Test in Abu Dhabi, and conducted more TPC running in 2024. From there, more work would have been arranged, and a key part of McLaren's argument in terms of justifying its commitment to Palou is that had he continued with the planned program, he would have benefited further and had more chances to prove to McLaren his F1 credentials. There was also other work Palou conducted behind the scenes, including various virtual meetings of several hours duration, and the extent of his involvement was disclosed by his defence, primarily to argue that McLaren got as much out of his simulator work and testing as he did. However, Palou also concedes that he benefited from this in being able to drive McLaren's F1 car at the level required. One other claim is that McLaren could have used other drivers or sold the mileage had Palou not benefited instead. Palou argued there were 2 benefits to McLaren in him doing this work compared to others, as it prepared him best to do the job McLaren needed him to do, and he felt he could help give valuable feedback on its car and also improve McLaren's simulator tools given his experience. It's been argued that Palou's exit actually allowed McLaren to profit in this regard, as it agreed a deal for Toyota driver Ryo Hirakawa to conduct a TPC test day in 2023 and in 2024 for $3 million, and up to $3.5 million had an option to drive in an FP1 session being exercised. One of the most unusual aspects to have become public in this case is how Palou's camp dragged current F1 Championship leader Oscar Piastri into the matter. Piastri's infamous tweet on August 2, 2022 was a stunning moment in that year's dramatic driver market saga, as the then Alpine protégé rejected the team's claim that he would replace Fernando Alonso in its F1 lineup in 2023. Piastri had instead signed up for a shock McLaren switch to replace the struggling Daniel Ricciardo, with his tweet a surprise twist that stunned everyone who read it, including, apparently, Palou. He claims that in 2022, after already signing one McLaren agreement, he saw Piastri's tweets and the subsequent confirmation that Piastri would join McLaren in 2023. According to Palou, that was the first time things changed. His argument is the conditions around his role at McLaren and his F1 prospects were fundamentally altered by the Piastri move, which he was not aware was on the cards. Palou said he was very upset, worried and angry, and claimed Brown had told him it was the decision of team principal Andreas Seidel, a curious claim as Brown is, as CEO, obviously significantly involved in F1 driver decisions. Brown has since called it clearly ludicrous to suggest he was either not keen on Piastri or did not play a key part in signing him. While Piastri was clearly plan A, Palou's F1 options were legitimate, just as a backup among other young options for the future. McLaren's plan B was for Palou to step in as a reserve if either Piastri or Lando Norris was ill or injured. Plan C was to replace Piastri with Palou if Piastri struggled badly as a rookie in 2023. But at no point did McLaren contractually promise Palou that a race seat was imminently on the table, and the team argues that if Palou's belief in McLaren's commitment really was shaken that badly in August 2022, he would not have signed another McLaren deal 2 months later. When Palou got cold feet on sticking with McLaren for IndyCar, he considered whether he had any other F1 options. Palou said in his witness statement he was pushing his management to get me an F1 seat in any team in F1. The implication is that Palou felt getting an alternative F1 deal would give him a way out of the McLaren contract on a legitimate basis. Palou's McLaren deal did offer him a way out if he had a full-time race seat offer by a certain point in the year, but this is understood to have passed by the time Palou wanted to breach his McLaren contract in the summer of 2023. Palou briefly ended up on Red Bull's radar. Palou has claimed he contacted Red Bull Motorsport advisor Helmut Marko in June 2023 and said Marko was open to discussing a possible F1 race seat with me and asked me about the conditions to get a release from the McLaren contract for F1. Palou instructed one of the people working as part of his team to ask Brown about the conditions for a release. A day later, Palou claims to have been informed that Brown, after receiving that approach, had gone to Marko himself. While Palou claims for sure it did not help, and that after this conversation Marko was suddenly not interested anymore, McLaren's argument is that is not its doing. Brown spoke to Marko and to Williams boss James Vowles to inquire about possibilities for Palou, even though there was no contractual obligation to do so. McLaren's argument is therefore that it went above and beyond what was required to assist Palou, and that any lack of F1 alternative was not its doing. It also points to releasing Gabriel Bortoleto from its driver development program to race for Sauber in F1 as proof it will help its young drivers if an F1 race seat is genuinely on the table. According to Palou, a further attempt to establish the terms for a release from McLaren in case of future F1 approaches appears to have amounted to several millions of dollars, made up from income from sponsor NTT, General Motors, lawyer fees and F1 testing. In short, McLaren wanted to be reimbursed for what it had invested in Palou and what it stood to lose from him not racing for its IndyCar team, and of course this is more or less what its court claim is over now. One interesting revelation is that Palou claimed in his testimony he discovered he was going to be McLaren's lowest paid IndyCar driver, despite being a champion. So, as the summer of 2023 approached, and Ganassi was keen to retain Palou despite 2 breaches of contract, he tried to get his McLaren deal renegotiated on more favourable terms, even though he was already theoretically locked in. Brown had a falling out with Palou's management team in May 2023, but met with Palou personally at the end of that month. A revised McLaren offer said to be worth millions followed, which the team argues shows significant willing, as it was under no obligation to increase Palou's salary. But Palou claims it included a lot of bonuses to make it look like it was competitive compared to Ganassi's offer, even though from what he remembers, the base salary was almost half of that in the CGR offer. This leaves McLaren thinking that Palou was only interested in financial terms, whereas Palou's justification for spurning McLaren in the end to stay with Ganassi was purely competitive. That's partly because he says McLaren's IndyCar team was not at the level his current team was, and were not in the equation to win the championship. Palou has won 4 of the 5 titles on offer since he joined Ganassi for his sophomore IndyCar season, and McLaren's best finish is second this year with O'Ward. Curiously, Palou used Fernando Alonso to illustrate his argument that he alone could not have dramatically changed McLaren's IndyCar fortunes, which forms part of Palou's defence. Alonso was cited extensively by Palou, both in terms of his wider F1 career context, but also with Alonso's unsuccessful Indianapolis 500 attempts with McLaren. Having fought for victory on his Indy 500 debut with Andretti, he failed to qualify in his first attempt at the race with McLaren, and finished only 21st the following year. Palou said that McLaren has had really good drivers in IndyCar without getting good enough results to win a championship, and that McLaren would not have had better results over the next 2 seasons had he joined. This was one of many slightly left field details to have emerged from this case so far. The emergence of Hirakawa's McLaren testing arrangement was another, as was McLaren's last-ditch attempt to sign ex-F1 driver and Indy 500 winner Marcus Ericsson after it learned of Palou's breach, through his representatives that is, as Palou opted not to inform Brown directly. Despite not getting the notice it would have liked, McLaren moved quickly to try to find an adequate replacement, but Ericsson had already reached a verbal agreement to join Andretti instead. Its subsequent driver choices were tangled up in a desire to get a good enough driver to satisfy the likes of NTT and IndyCar engine partner General Motors, which McLaren claims it simply did not have enough time to do. McLaren has subsequently ended up with an IndyCar lineup of O Ward, ex-Renault F1 junior Christian Lundgaard, and Nolan Siegel, with Siegel brought into the Palou court case as well. That's because Palou's defence argues that McLaren was able to make money off selling its vacant Palou seat to Siegel, even though McLaren actually signed David Malukas first, then when Malukas was injured replaced him with ex-Sauber F1 junior Théo Pourchaire, who was signed until the end of the year but got dropped after a month for Siegel. Part of the Palou defence around this is that had he raced for the team as planned, McLaren would have shown no interest in Siegel. And even if it had, Palou driving the number 6 NTT-backed McLaren would only leave the number 7 available. As that's sponsored by British-American tobacco brands, Palou's defence argued that Siegel would not be allowed to drive that car because he was under 21, even though Siegel's number 6 car had BAT branding at Indianapolis in 2025. It is one of the more curious arguments that underlines why this case is not about Palou denying he was in the wrong, but just trying to mitigate the damages associated with his U-turn as much as possible.